Hey there, welcome back to another episode of Storybound. Thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast. We have Debbie Lynn. Debbie, would you mind telling the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, well, I am a fantasy author in my personal life. I'm a mom and a therapist, which definitely works in my favor with writing. And as far as mental health concerns, that's part of why we're here. I have a laundry list, but I'm going to give you the couple of big ones: lifetime eating disorder, depression, anxiety. I could go on, but those are the big ones that I deal with the most.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. I understand what it is like to have a laundry list, as you call it. I know we've had this conversation before. That doesn't always feel great to have a laundry list. Me, myself, I have ADHD, autism, OCD, and then of course I have all the byproducts, depression, anxiety that come along with all of those things. So I understand. You said you were also a therapist and a yoga teacher and a mom.
Yes, very busy. It's a lot all the time. Very
So
overwhelming, which is great for the anxiety.
I'm sure there's got to be a lot of like wheels spinning in your head.
All the time. There's like a hamster wheel just going all the time. And
That's
there's a
so
lot of perfectionism going on. So yeah, it's amazing.
I understand that. I actually wrote like that exact line in my Substack post today. I was talking about OCD tendencies and I literally compared it to being my brain being on this like nonstop
Yeah.
hamster wheel. And if you can't get off and as much
Mm.
as you want to, so it can be pretty tough. I'm very, very curious. Actually, let me pause that. Let me hold that thought to a little bit further. So let's back up a little bit before we dive into like how you deal with things and like coping mechanisms and all that. What are you working on lately? Obviously, the goal of the podcast is to bring on different creatives.
Mhm.
Like, what are you working on lately? What do you do? Creative endeavor.
Ooh. Well, I'm a writer, like I said. I published a book last fall as an urban fantasy, and I'm working on the sequel to it. And yeah, well, I'd hope to have it out end of this year, early next year, but I'm sure we'll get into it. Some mental health stuff got in the way.
Mhm.
So I'm trying to get back into that. So I've got that project. It's the sequel in a probably 4-book series. And then I've got a side project that I really love to work on, and I have to fight myself to work on the sequel instead of the side project.
Mhm.
And then I recently started like a couple new things that I'm not really sure where they're going to go yet. Yeah, just trying to stay busy, but also I'm highly motivated right now, but that's not always the case. So,
Yeah,
you know.
it ebbs and flows. I understand. And I know we were talking like we've talked a little bit about some little side projects. I know I'm starting my novella series and we've kind of chatted about that and
Yeah.
what that looks like. And I'm glad you're diving into that and it's giving you a little bit of inspiration right now. Sometimes you have to jump around, I feel like, especially when you're dealing with like mental health. Even I know we are both writers, but even for me, I know sometimes jumping around from like hobby to hobby kind of helps keep that well of inspiration and motivation
Yeah.
going because sometimes like the drive to even just write isn't even there.
Words are hard sometimes. And
Yeah.
I used to paint. And so like way back in the day, I won some like little county awards in high school, but now when I paint, it looks like a kindergartner did it because I don't do it very often. So I get frustrated because I'm a perfectionist and I'm over here talking with my hands. You can only see it a little bit, but they're going crazy. So,
You're fine.
but sometimes I doodle, I draw like basic things like dinosaurs and cats or whatever, but I might get out a little paint or get one of my daughters to like color by number things because
Yeah.
words can be hard, but when you have creativity in your blood, like you have to get it out. So there are other ways to do it when you can't make the words. So,
I agree. When you're like, it's just like it's in you. There's not something,
yeah.
creativity is not something that like it has one singular like vehicle, right? Like
Right.
when I know, again, I know we're writers, that's like our main thing. But I feel like when you're a creative person, you dabble in so many different
Uh-huh.
things. You're trying so many different things, painting, singing,
Yeah.
playing,
Crocheting. Yeah.
yeah, crocheting, knitting. I know one of the
Yep.
girls, a couple of girls in our writing group, they do
Hmm.
knitting, right? Or are they
Yeah.
crocheters?
There's needles and yarn. I don't know.
That's true.
When I was in
Needles and
college, my
yarn.
roommate and I learned to crochet, and so we made a bunch of squares. That's as far as we got.
That's as far as you got. Yeah. That's about probably about as far as I got in my like knitting journey. I tried it at one
Yeah.
point. I feel like I've tried most like
Yeah.
creative hobbies at this point. I
Yeah.
taught myself how to like,
Sculpting was fun for a while.
oh, that
Yeah.
sounds messy and
Yeah.
fun.
It was. I did not have a ghost-like experience though, so I'm really disappointed. No Patrick Swayze.
We all are hoping to see Patrick Swayze while we're like, breaking out the clay and stuff. Tell me a little bit about writing this first book. Obviously, putting a book out into the world is a
Mhm.
hard thing to do. It's not an easy feat. It takes a lot of
Right.
time, energy, blood, sweat, and tears, all of that stuff. So tell me a
Mhm.
little bit about writing this book while dealing with things like anxiety. What does that
Yeah.
look like for you?
So this particular book, like my first book took me 5 years for variety of scheduling, whatever motivation reasons. But this one that I'm working on right now, the sequel, has been maybe not the most challenging, but very challenging. So I started it a couple years ago and then decided I wanted to focus on the editing and the publishing of the first ones. It's been back and forth. And then I said, I made a timeline last year. I said, all right, we're going to get this done. We're going to get it published. Got to stay on track or whatever. And the last year has been really hard and my mood has just slumped. And I had a major depressive episode, like the worst I've ever had. And I didn't write 3 months, 3 months, 3.5 months. I didn't write. And so that just sidetracked everything, which is why I'm like, I'm not putting a timeline now on this book because I can't put that pressure on myself because that perfectionism and that pressure and it's overwhelming. And we're still eating microwavable meals at this point.
Yeah.
Like I'm not even cooking yet. The fact that I'm writing and I wrote 900 words today, that's a huge celebration. It has been difficult is an understatement because for a while I had guilt that I wasn't writing. And it was my own expectation that I would
Yeah,
write. So like, yeah,
we
I
do
put
that
it
to
on
ourselves.
myself.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even in our writing group and we check in and everybody's, oh, take care of yourself. I'm like, no, I should be writing. I don't know. So I put that on myself. So that just made everything worse. But I'm excited right now to be getting back into this and other projects. I just have to give myself grace. And that's a big thing I'm learning is just grace. So like,
Grace is really
you don't
hard.
have to be perfect.
Yeah,
So
I feel like grace is really hard. I feel like a lot of us who are either neurodivergent or dealing with mental illness in some way, we hold the bar really high. And no one
yes.
is holding that bar high except us. We are
Right.
literally doing it to ourselves,
Yep. Which
So
is really
learning to,
frustrating. And then we beat ourselves
yeah,
up because we're doing it.
exactly, exactly. And so we can almost be our own worst enemy sometimes, I feel like. So, yeah, grace is really, really important. And I'm glad you're working on learning how to do that and give that to yourself. I really had to
Mhm.
learn how to give myself grace through my like post divorce depression and
Yes.
grief. I had to give myself a lot of grace. And that was a
Yeah.
really hard journey for me. So I understand how that feels. I also want to talk about a little bit about that timeline. And
Yeah.
you set a timeline for yourself. Have you found that in your mental health journey that like it's like constraints that you're placing upon yourself, whether it's a
Mhm.
timeline or like a word count goal, do you find those to be helpful at all in your process? Or have you found
Mhm.
the opposite? Like, where
Yeah.
do you fall? Do you feel like sometimes they're helpful? Like, where are you at on that?
Yeah. I was gonna say if you left it at both, I was just gonna say yes. Like yeah, they're sometimes helpful. And so that's one of the things I was thinking of was, routine can be really important. So write something every day, write 500 words every day, write whatever. When I do National Novel Writing Month, in order to meet the count, you write a certain number of words every day. And I always aim for a little above that. And that helps me, but it's a contained time frame. It's 30 days.
Mhm.
So in the grand scheme of things, routine is really important, but it has to be flexible for me. And so if there's times like that in the past when it's been eating disorder behaviors, like I was really sick. I was really really sick for a while, and I did actually write some, but I could not. There was no way I could put it on a routine at that point because I would have failed most of the time, like failed, and then I would have beat myself up, and that would have made the behaviors even worse. And I just have to be mindful of that, which I'm not always great at, and noticing, hey, this is what life is throwing at me. So what do I need to change and adapt in order to be able to remain creative and healthy?
Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree that we have to pay very close attention to where we are at in terms of our mental health because it
Mhm.
does ebb and flow so much. You can have a week where you're, on high in terms of like your anxiety is low, your depression is low, and it feels like you're getting your life back. And then like the pendulum can swing the other way. And
Yep.
so tactics you're using at one point may not work in another point.
Yeah. That's what
It's
this recovery has been like from this depressive episode. 3, 4 days of great and then boom. And then a few more days and then boom. So he just it's part of living with a mental illness. And I hate that term, but I like to say like mental health condition or whatever, but it gets part of it because you never know. Even if your meds are great and you're doing all the things on the list, your brain is wacky. So you just have to learn to adapt.
I agree.
It's a
I
clinical term, by
agree.
the way, wacky brain.
Wacky brain. That's what the therapists call it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We call them many things. Hijacked brain is a big one, but yeah.
I like that. I do like
Yeah.
that. It's interesting because it relieves you of the control. You know what I mean?
Yes.
It's not like your fault. I
And
kind of
that's
like that.
exactly why. Yeah. And it's one, so as an addiction and mental health counselor, it's one that we use a lot in the addiction world. But I had a friend tell me during this recent episode as I was crying on the phone, he was like, Deb, your brain has been hijacked. You know this, right? It has been hijacked. Like this is not your fault, and sometimes we need to remember that. And so I really do like that word for that.
Yeah. I may have to start using that myself when I'm having my low days and things like
Yeah.
that because I still get them. I've post divorce now like 2 years, but I'm a lot steadier than I once was. And I'm a lot steadier now that I've gotten like my laundry list of diagnoses because now I know what's wrong
Yeah.
with me. But it's still
Um,
up and down.
can
It's
we
still,
can we talk about that for a second? The like
yeah.
validation that comes with getting the diagnoses?
Yeah, definitely. Do you
Yeah.
want to dive into it? Do you want me to dive into it? Like
You
which way
you
you might
dive in and then I'll
benefit?
follow.
Okay. For me, because I haven't shared this on the podcast yet. For me, I always felt different, if that makes sense. I was always looking for ways to escape. And
Mhm.
when I was younger, I used drugs to escape. When I got older and I had kids and I was married, I was still looking for ways to escape. I was one of those girls who was like constantly looking for like a van to buy that I could like remodel and drive across the United States and like check
I
out
did
of
like that, yeah.
life. I was always looking for ways to check out. That was
Mhm.
kind of one of my ex-husband's complaints when we were getting divorced is like, you're never here. Like you were never home. Cause I was always like checked out. I was always at roller derby. I was always like doing bodybuilding. I
Mhm.
was just trying to like get away from like, it seemed like I was trying to get away from like my family, which wasn't the case. I was trying to run from this feeling inside of
Yeah.
me.
But wherever you
Um,
go, there you are, so it didn't
and,
work.
and it's always, yeah, and it never worked. And it led me to my divorce because I was
Mhm.
constantly running from it. And so after my divorce, I felt a lot of grief and guilt around being the way that I was. And so I went and I got several psychological evaluations. I got two from two separate doctors. So like two different practices, so completely unrelated, just to get confirmation that like what one saw, the other saw, that sort of thing. And I was diagnosed at the age of 35, 2 years after my divorce. I was diagnosed with autism, ADHD, and OCD. And I was like, no wonder in my 20s when I was like on all these like meds for like my anxiety and my
Mhm.
depression, like nothing was working. Like
Yes.
none of them worked because guess what? Autism anxiety is not the same as general
Right.
anxiety. Like meds don't treat that. And so I'm actually med free now and I am probably the most steady that I've been in a while because of my diagnoses, I've been able
Yes.
to really lean in to what's working for me. So
Mhm.
I use my noise canceling headphones all the time. I don't hide the fact that I like clench my fists
Mhm.
anymore. I don't hide that I do this a lot. Like I'm a clencher. I like pressure. That's
Right
like
now.
what comes. Yep. I do a lot of moving and I don't try to hide
Uh-huh.
that anymore in person. I do a lot of different things in terms of like my comfort. Like I don't force myself to wear things that
Mhm.
aren't
Try to fit
sensory.
in
Yeah, I
because
don't
you
try
know.
to Exactly, exactly. And I've been very honest about that, even with my employer. That's like the first when I started my new job and I was in the interview process, I was honest, like, I'm autistic, I have ADHD. And like, so when they're like, what are your weaknesses? I was like, well, I have these things and I've been told I'm X, Y, and Z. But because I have these and I still
Mhm.
got hired and I've gotten nothing but praises while leaning into who I am and
Mhm.
finding an employer that can like appreciate my differences and my very analytical brain, if that
Uh-huh.
makes sense. So for me, it's really brought me a lot of peace. It's helped me process my grief. It's
Mhm.
helped me not feel so guilty because had I been diagnosed earlier in my life, I wouldn't have been kicking and screaming through my 20s.
Yep.
You know, if I had had the supports and the knowledge on how to even support myself, you know?
Yeah.
So even having that knowledge of a diagnosis and having that in your pocket can mean the world. It
Mhm.
absolutely can. What's
Yeah.
your experience?
Yeah. One thing I want to say is, like, sorry, my glasses keep falling. Like you said, the medication, because I've been on so many antidepressants and they work and they don't work, and you raise the dose and you get side effects and, all this stuff. And you have to have a proper diagnosis because major depression is not treated the same as bipolar, and bipolar 1 and bipolar 2 can be treated differently with different medications. So, and like you said, different types of anxiety respond better to different medications. So that is a huge reason to obtain a proper diagnosis. But personally, for me, without going into just like all the childhood trauma, but there is a lot of childhood trauma, and
That's where it
and
comes from.
it is, yeah. And I say that now because I am going to, like, it will come up later when you ask me about resources. So
Okay.
the rest of my laundry list does include ADHD, which I've only been diagnosed with for a year, PTS, and this is kind of a kicker.
Aren't those like
Because
comorbid though? Like typically like ADHD and like
there's
PTSD, they
yeah, there
often look
can't well, yeah, it
comorbid.
can be. There's a high comorbidity. And for me, I was always a very anxious child. And you can see I'm moving in my chair and stuff, but like the social anxiety, the like overthinking everything. You send me a thumbs up in a text message and I'm gonna freak out for a day over what you
Can
meant.
can
Okay. Like
tell our listeners how you got ready for this podcast.
what with moving all the stuff around on my desk?
No, no, no,
Or
like when
what?
I sent you the prep doc, when I
Oh,
sent you
oh, yeah,
the
yeah,
prep doc.
yeah, yeah. So you sent me a doc with like what 19 or 20 questions,
Mhm.
and I spent about 2 hours answering. I didn't tell you that, answering each question in a different color so that I could make sure that I was ready. Your
I
questions are
love that
black, my answers are blue. So like,
I love
but
that it's color coded.
answering them so that I could easily see what mine were, and I actually do have it pulled up right next to me. I haven't looked at it yet, but because I wanted to be prepared, because I didn't want you to ask me a question and then be like, I don't know the answer to that. And then I look stupid. And then you're like, what do I do now? So I had a lot of fear and anxiety about that. And then also, I spent about 15 minutes trying to angle my desk so you can see the walls here behind me. So it's a lot. The anxiety is a lot. And it's a lot better than it used to be. But I grew up, I had a dysfunctional upbringing and developed. I mean, I can't even tell you. I remember being in third grade. I was 7 years old. Okay, because I was early in school. So I was 7 years old. I was in third grade and I had eating disorder behaviors.
Mm.
And I remember at some point in middle school thinking like, why do I feel so flat? Like not necessarily sad, but flat all the time. And the anxiety was just always, I can't remember a time I wasn't anxious. So
I
it
just wanna let
wasn't
you
until high
know
school.
I wanna let you know I relate to that flatness. I understand
Yeah. It's
that feeling. Yes.
so many people think depression is crying all the time. And it
It's not.
can be, but there's a lot of flatness.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so then I just thought, well, this is how people are. They sneak food and they hate their bodies and they feel flat all the time and they have panic attacks. Like this is how people are. And then in high school, I realized that's not actually how people are. Some
Mhm.
people, yes, but my friends would be like, what's going, that's not how we think, Deb. And then of course other people would kind of mock me for it if I was having a panic attack. So it was a whole thing. But that's when I realized was high school. Okay, this is not okay. I don't want to live like this. But unfortunately, I had parents who completely ignored all of that. So it
Yeah.
wasn't until I was in my 20s and I sought therapy and I got some diagnoses. And then in my 30s, I got a PTSD diagnosis. And last year I got an ADHD diagnosis and I was like, guys, you got to stop throwing these on there, you know?
It's
Um,
just scream. That's
yeah.
all it is.
But so for me, the anxiety has always been there. The racing thoughts, the overthinking, just all this stuff. And I always just thought, and I always joked, I said, I think I might have a little bit of ADHD, but it's probably just the anxiety. No, it really is both, but they're so
It is.
comorbid. There's overlapping symptoms. But the one that's actually been on my mind a lot. So I'll share quickly and then I'll turn it back over to you. But in my eating disorder, I developed an addiction to stimulants.
Mhm.
And it took years to be able to say that's what it was. And so I have struggled, and I've really only right now recently coming to terms with that. So I have some really supportive people because I reached out and I reconnected after this depressive episode because I realized like that was going to save my life. And so I've been talking through this a lot with people and feeling always like I didn't quite belong here and I didn't quite belong there. My addiction wasn't bad enough, but it was worse than my peers in the eating disorder realm with, and so
Mm.
finally it's just like it wasn't not bad enough. Like it was bad enough. Like I can say that now. So the diagnosis is so important, or the label, because in that I don't have a diagnosis. I didn't go to a doctor and get an SUD, substance use disorder diagnosis. But the label is so important because now I can say, hi, I'm Debbie, I'm an addict. And
Yeah.
I can say I have an eating disorder. It wasn't just sneaking fudge in the middle of the night from the fridge. Like I actually have an eating disorder. And that was so validating. Like I'm not crazy. I'm
Mhm.
not
It's
just different.
it's empowering.
My brain has been hijacked. Exactly. Yeah. It's empowering to be able to say, like, yes, this is something that my brain is wacky and it's not my fault. And that is what a proper diagnosis gives you.
Yeah, I feel that. It's not my fault. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what my diagnoses gave me was it's
Yeah.
not my fault. And it's not that it frees you of responsibility for
Right.
things that you've done, right?
Right.
It's not at all like I'm still responsible for my part in my divorce.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still responsible for my meltdowns. I'm still
Mm-hmm.
responsible for when I lash out at people because I'm ADHD raging and overstimulated. Like I'm
Yes.
still responsible for
Did
those
that
things.
yesterday.
Yeah. You still got to apologize, right?
Yep.
I still have to be an adult. I still have
Yeah.
to own up to that stuff,
Yeah.
but it frees me from the guilt.
And the
I
shame.
can and the shame.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it doesn't free me from the responsibility of being a decent person and owning up to it and all that stuff, but it does. It frees you from the shame and the guilt. I agree with that so much. I think that's a beautiful part about getting diagnoses, but I also feel like it's like a twofold kind of thing. It's like a double-edged sword because
Yeah.
access to healthcare is awful in this
Yeah.
country. I paid close to $1,000 for
I
both of
believe
my
it.
psychological evaluations because they weren't covered.
Yep.
And I had to save a lot of money for a long time in order to be able to do that. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people don't have that ability.
Healthcare is a privilege, unfortunately. Like good
It is.
healthcare is a privilege. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was just like, I don't know if it's autism. I don't know if it's ADHD. I don't know. I don't know, but
Mhm.
I feel like it's something in this range, right? Like it's, and then I come to find out it's both of them, and it's
Yeah.
OCD. And the OCD one, it really makes sense for the way that
Mhm.
I work, and I've started using that like ever since I got my diagnosis, and I'm like obsessing about something, I just tell my boyfriend I'm stuck in a loop. That's what I tell him. I'm
Mhm.
stuck in a loop. And he's like,
Mhm.
how do we break the loop? How do we close the loop? And so that's kind of
Yeah.
like the language that we use now to communicate. And it's really helped like actually bring down like arguments and
Yeah.
to neutralize like things.
Yeah, having the diagnosis gives you language in a lot of cases.
It
Yeah.
does. It really, really does. I want to dive in to like coping mechanisms and
Yeah.
support and all that because you have mentioned reaching out to people. You have mentioned talking to people. You've also talked about meds and things like that.
Mhm.
So, like for you right now in this moment of your life, because obviously it changes from one point in our life to other points
Mhm.
in our lives. Like right now, where's Debbie in terms of like what does support look like to you?
Yeah. So, as far as medication, I hesitated there. I don't have shame over it, but other people have problems with it. I take 3 antidepressants. I'm a therapist, so I shouldn't have hesitated, but it is what it is. But
Isn't
so
that funny? Like
it is so
you
yeah.
being the therapist, like, you're supposed to be advocating for your
I
patients,
know,
you
and I can
know?
advocate for them. I just told somebody today, I said, "You know what? I take 3. It's okay if they have to add 1 for you.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
okay if it gives you the help you need," and that's true, but I have had people make comments, recently to me about that, so I was like, "Oh," but yeah, so
That
I take 3
sucks.
antidepressants, yeah. I took 1, and then this episode happened, and so now I have 2 more, and we'll see how long I have to have them, and one of the things that was huge, like I mentioned, is connection, and that's I literally have an app that I mentioned to you, it's called Finch, and I'm
Mhm.
not a spokesperson for it or anything, but I really like it, and you put your self-care goals on it, and one of my top goal that I start every day is connect, and I just have
Mhm.
to connect, and it pops up and says, "Hey, you haven't connected yet," and so that could be a text message, a call, whatever, Zooming with somebody. It could be 2 minutes, but I just have to, like, connect with someone.
I wanna dive into that. I wanna
Yes.
dive into that. Connection can be
Yes.
so hard for people who are suffering from mental illness or are neurodivergent.
Mhm.
So many of us feel like burdens to those around us. How are you
Yes.
dealing with that?
So I have dealt with that. I'm 39 years old and I have dealt with that for a good 30 plus years. Right. How I am dealing with that in this moment is not caring about it. I am forcing myself to ignore that feeling, which is very hard, but the more I do it,
Mhm.
the easier it gets. And I have a couple of people who I did reach out to when I was having suicidal thoughts, and I said, you know what, I might be ignoring you or I might be annoying you, but I actually don't care because you're keeping me alive right now.
That's fair.
And I got some mixed results there, but it is what it is. But I have a couple of people that I reconnected with during that time because I started going to some support groups and just reaching out to people. And a couple people reached out to me because I made a couple Facebook posts very vulnerable, which is not like me. I was like,
Mhm.
warning, vulnerable post about depression. If you don't like that, don't read it. And then I wrote a whole bunch. And I had some old friends reach out to me and say, you know what, I've been feeling the same way. And your post was really like it was inspiring and you were really strong for doing it or whatever. So I have a handful of people now that we have all talked about it. And we've said, we all feel like we're burdens because we're all in that same boat. And so we've just had an agreement. Reach out every day if you need to. I feel like a burden, you feel like a burden, nobody cares. We're just going to do it.
Mhm. I
So,
love
if you
that.
have people who make you feel like a burden, they are not your connection.
That's absolutely true. Absolutely true. I want to say that it's also very brave of you to set aside that sort of like having that don't give a fuck attitude, but like reaching out anyways. That because it's so hard. It is so hard. But
It
I
is
love that.
hard.
No, but I love that you're doing it. I love that
Yeah,
you are reaching out because
yeah,
connection is so important.
yeah. And it, and it is, and I don't want to make it sound like, oh, just decide and it's easy because it's not. But there was May 31st, like I left my house and I did not plan on being home. May 31st of this year. So like a little over a month ago. And I was like, I'm not calling anybody. I'm not because nobody cares. Yeah, I'm a burden, like the whole thing, right? And I decided, I was like, okay, like I had a moment. I was like, I'm just gonna call this one person. And he happened to answer. I caught him in a 5 minute window where he happened to answer, where he was free. And we talked for a little bit and it wasn't all miracle and rainbows and sunshine, but it gave me just enough to get through to June 1st. And
Yeah.
that's when I realized, okay, that connection, like that's so important. I'm an isolator, I'm a loner, I always have been. I'm an introvert, which is really weird for my job, but a lot of us are actually, and then we go home and
Yeah.
just crash. But so like I have a couple of friends who we talk about this every day. We're getting really deep with some stuff, lately. And we talk about how we overanalyze when each other text. Like I texted bye to a friend earlier, and 5 minutes later I got it. Was that a mad bye? I would
That's
have
so
done
on brand for
I
someone
would
who
have
that's
done the
anxious.
exact same thing. Yes, yeah, I'm a very ADHD person, but, like, I have done the same thing to him. So, we kinda go back and forth with these, like, neurotic things, but we understand each other. That's why I can connect with people. I have a handful of people. We understand each other, and so I know, just to give an example, that somebody who's not in this boat, like mental illness, neurodivergence, probably won't. They'll be like, "That's really fucking silly." But
Yeah.
like I said earlier, you send me a thumbs up text, or you send me like 5 responses in a row and they're one word, or you just say K, or
I hate all of
oh, I
that.
know. Like I see your bubbles come up and disappear and come up and disappear. And my head is just going, I'm annoying them. I'm too much. They hate me now. They're trying to tell me how they hate me, or they're just going to ghost me altogether. Like this whole thing. So I have people who feel the same way, which is interesting. We apologize to each other a lot, but we call each other on it, and I know how to respond to them in a text because I know how I need to be responded to. And we prefer phone calls because for that reason, but when you have to text, you have to text. And so just as an example, like it's not easy. They're still overthinking all the time. But I found the right people for right now, and maybe 6 months from now it'll be different. But right now I found the people that I need to connect with because we can connect the same way. And that keeps
Oh,
me out of isolation because otherwise I have kids, but it's different. You can't connect with your 4-year-old like you
no.
can
Oh,
a
no.
peer. So yeah, that's
I
super
get that.
important.
Again, I love that you're like digging into that connection. That's one of the
Mhm.
hardest things that I probably have the hardest time with. I'm the same with you. I am an isolator, and I can go months without seeing a person, and that's my choice. I'm pretty content on my own for the most part.
Hyper independence.
Hyper
That's
independence, it's a coping mechanism.
Yep,
I have all
yep.
that too. So I get it. But and I love that you're doing that. It's part of the reason I feel like I wanted to start the podcast was like to start making more connections because so many of people in my life are neurotypical, so they're not really like understanding the things that are happening in my brain, and they don't
Yes.
understand why I'm you see it in our writing group where I'm like mass messaging the writing group, and it's because I'm stuck in a loop. I'm stuck in a loop, and I'm like
Yeah,
hyper fixating and hyper
yeah.
focusing, you
I
know?
love when you do that because I always have anxiety when I do it. So I'm like, somebody else is doing it. Somebody else thinks the way I think because I'm like,
Yeah.
oh no, I sent 3 in a row. They're gonna hate me. But I'm like, oh well, she's doing it too, so it's okay.
I can't help it. Like I do it and then I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I shouldn't have done that." I because that's like the ADHD, that's like the impulsivity. You
Yeah.
lack that
We have
control.
so
And
many
so
thoughts coming really fast and you have to get them out.
it's true. It's true.
Yeah.
It's so true. It's so hard. So let's dig into like resources. We've talked about
Yes.
support, like especially support people, but like what resources? I'm assuming you're using this app that you called it's called Finch. You're not the only person who's told me about this app either.
Yeah,
It looks
you said
super
that.
cute.
That's so funny. Yeah. So, and now actually I am looking at this thing because I wanted to make sure here. So yeah, Finch, I have a 32-day streak on Finch, which is pretty exciting. I was
That's
like,
a
this is
long
too much work.
time.
I know. My best friend said, he was like, oh, you should do this. I was like, that's too much work, Jay. I'm depressed. I'm not doing it. But actually it gamifies self-care, which is research based. And so it's really cool.
Mhm.
So there's that. And the other thing I wrote down that I've been working on is I've been doing a lot of 12-step work.
Okay.
And so when I mentioned childhood dysfunction earlier, that's why I wanted to say that because I'm very early in it, but I started looking into ACA, which is adult children of alcoholics.
Heard of
And
it.
then there's like a parentheses, like, and other dysfunctional families.
Yep, I
Um,
heard of it.
and so I've been reading the book and I have highlighted in my Kindle so much. And then I call my friend and we talk about it because we're in the same boat. And while I haven't, like I said, delved into it a lot, I have found it so rewarding to know that I'm not the only one. And I'm a therapist, right? I have a lot of education. And so I know how trauma affects people as far as what the textbooks can tell us. But this gets into the nitty gritty.
How do I put this? Like people who are really smart, we tend, or not even just really smart, or like people who are really like specialized or see or mental illness, we tend to intellectualize our feelings. It's like we can read all day long and we can know
Yep.
exactly what's going on, but we don't know how
Yep.
to do the thing.
Yes. Yes. That's totally me so much. And I know that. And then my therapists have told me that. Yeah, it's totally me. And in grad school, I remember we had to do different like exercises. And my teacher came over in one class and was just like, you're not emoting. I was like, this is all I got, man. Like, it's intellectualization. I'm not emoting. I'm a very emotional person, But when you ask me a direct question, I'm going to tell you what I think, not how I feel. And a friend did that today, and I was just like, I don't have any words. And he's like, you're a writer. You have a linguistics degree. I was like, words are hard, man.
It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. But so
Yeah.
having resources, whether it's this or something else, but I said that I wanted to bring that up because it is really helpful for me. And there's some 12-step programs as well, and the app and the medication and the support group, or just support system, I mean. And your questions had asked, are there books, tools, therapies? And as far as therapy goes, that is so individualized.
It is.
So for me, mindfulness-based therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy are really helpful. My favorite, so CBT and ACT, which is acceptance and commitment therapy, are my favorites, not only to work with, but to use with people professionally. And so ACT is mindfulness-based, and I'm a yoga teacher at Tracks, but I find that taking a moment to, before I do anything, especially before I write, because I got to clear my head, but before I do anything, making a phone call, because of course I have to rehearse the whole phone call. Whatever I do, I take that moment, my little woosah moment, and I breathe, and maybe I visualize how I want it to go or whatever. Say a mantra. I love be here now. Actually, I'm going to get a tattoo soon that says be where your feet are. Just
I
like
love that.
be in the present moment.
Like be grounded in that. Like
Yes.
I love
Yeah.
that. That's
And
beautiful.
I just got one. I don't know if you can see it on here. I can turn my arm. So it's 2
Yeah.
arrows and it's like watercolor. And so this is my interpretation of, there's a Buddhist parable. I'm not Buddhist yoga, and I study a lot of mindfulness, but there's a Buddhist parable of the second arrow, which basically says the first arrow hurts, but the second arrow is the first arrow is pain. The second arrow is our suffering that we put upon ourselves because of the pain. So yeah, there's a yoga sutra that translated loosely says, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. And that just, I've loved that for years. So I got this tattoo just to remind myself, we're going to go through pain, depression, anxiety, getting a diagnosis, divorce, grief, whatever. But like you said, like we have to take responsibility for our part in it. And if we make the suffering worse, that's our part. And I can't help when I start to overthink, but I can use a coping skill, mindfulness, calling a friend, whatever, to stop the loop, like you said.
Yeah.
And that's how we stop the second arrow from hitting. So
I love that. I love that parable. I really do, because I feel like, again, people who are in this realm that we're in, that share similarities, we do cause a lot of our own suffering. And
it's
it
hard
is
to
hard.
hear.
It is hard to hear. It is hard to hear. And it's because of our, again, like you said, our hijacked brains. Like our hijacked brains are doing this to us. It's not like we want to be this way by any means, you know? But I do love that reminder that something can hurt. Someone can do something to you and it hurts, right? But that doesn't mean, especially for me, if I have OCD, I will analyze, overthink, obsess for like a year. If someone really hurts me, I will not give it up. And I am continuing my suffering.
Yeah.
I'm doing that to myself.
And I as a professional, I do want to say here though, that things like PTSD, sorry, I don't want anybody to feel blamed, like, oh, I can't stop these flashbacks, I'm doing them to myself. That's not 100% the case. If you're having flashbacks from a traumatic event, like you're not doing that to yourself. But you need the help. You need help to get through it. That is your responsibility. If you're not getting help, that's your part. But not being able to just get out of the flashbacks yourself, that's not your fault. So I just wanted to make sure to say that.
No, I agree, because we could definitely have people listening who have PTSD, and definitely don't want people taking it the wrong way. I'm talking about in my sense, where I have OCD and anxiety, and I will just replay. It's not a flashback. I'm just replaying conversations. Rumination. That's
the conversations that happened, the ones you wanted to happen, the ones that might happen and will probably never happen.
Exactly. That's exactly what is happening. All of these different things, there are overlaps, but they're not all the same, right? And so when we're talking, whether it's I'm talking or you're talking or any other podcast guest, I want everyone to know, like listeners and anyone on the show, that like we are talking individually about our experience. I am not trying to like blanket anyone because I am not a monolith. I am not trying to tell anyone what their experience should be
Yeah.
like. Not at all. Not at
Yeah.
all.
I didn't
So I
think you were doing that. I just felt like I needed to say that because I didn't want anybody to misinterpret. So
no, but I appreciate you doing it. I really do. I think it is a good thing to clarify. You can never be too safe. You never want someone to take. I feel like that's another thing is a lot of people who are like mental, like who have mental illness, like we're all really empathetic. Like we don't want to hurt anyone's feelings
yeah.
and like intentional or not. Like do not have that desire.
Yeah.
So yeah. Okay, well let's move on. I feel like we really dug into supports and mechanisms and coping mechanisms. So I love everything that you're doing. And I've told you this. I'm very, very proud of everything that you are doing because you are making big strides from what I have seen lately. So just as like friend to friend, like very proud of you, Debbie. So
Yeah, because you got a lot of the like depression texts. So
I know, but that like I've been there.
yeah.
I've been there. And so I don't mind the depression text because it's not always going to be depression text.
Right.
It's just a moment in our lives and
Yeah,
it will pass.
exactly. Yep.
It will pass. What keeps you through all of this craziness and our hijacked brains? What keeps you creating? What inspires you?
Well, like I said earlier, I just feel like it's kind of in my bones, in my blood. I was thinking about that from your list. You said, what inspires you, like even in difficult times or something like that. And I thought, well, there are times, like I mentioned, where I'm not really creating because it's
Mhm.
too dark. But when I really thought about it, I was still writing, I was jotting things down. And occasion except for a couple of the like very like the worst days, maybe 3 or 4 days. But for the rest of them, I was still jotting things down. I was still writing poetry that I don't haven't written since I was like 17 years old. I was getting my emotions out because it's cathartic. So however
Mhm.
you do it, you get it out. And so for me, it's I don't feel like it's an inspiration like, oh, my child or my child, or oh, this thing or that thing. It's just like it's a drive, it's a need. We talk about we need like food, water, sex, like creativity. That's got to
Yeah.
add that one for me. So,
No, I'm with
yeah.
you. I am with you. It's a thing that like drives you forward,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
And if you
know?
don't do it, then you start to get antsy
Yeah,
and your mind starts to just kind of do weird things and you have to get some things out.
I
So,
agree. I'm the
yeah.
same exact way. I don't know that I could have a life that wasn't creative.
Right.
I don't think it would be possible. I've been doing it from such a young
Yeah.
age,
I
you know?
started writing at 3. I have things that I wrote not quite that age, but at like 6 and 7 and 8 years old in my house. And
Yeah.
it's hilarious, but that helps motivate me too. That does help inspire me some when I'm just feeling like that imposter syndrome or like my timeline's all jacked up. I'm never going to be anything. I look back at something I wrote in like first grade and all the drawings I did for the cover. And I remember like I had so much passion. This has
Yeah.
been in me for so long.
Well,
And so that helps propel me. Even if I don't write today, give myself some grace, but it's in me. So,
yeah, I can relate to that. I really can. I remember being like trying to think, like second or third grade, and people asking me, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be an author. I
a
want
writer, yeah,
to
yeah,
be an author. I remember reading books and loving them. And again, they were that kind of escape for me. And I
yeah,
remember this is what I want to be when I grow up.
yeah.
And I've been writing ever since. So, and I've been doing
My
lots of other stuff too. But yeah, go ahead.
my like about the author in my book literally says something about how she's also a therapist or whatever, which is like her backup plan until this writing thing takes off or something like that.
Yeah.
I wanted to be a teacher or a doctor as my backup plan until I could become a best-selling
Okay.
author.
Oh, exactly. Exactly.
You know,
I'm
yeah.
in the same place. Yeah. My day job is just like holding me over until the
Yeah.
books can pay the bills.
Yeah. I love being a therapist, and even if I were able to write full time, I would probably do some therapy part time, but I would be on the beach. I would just be writing. I would have my laptop, looking over the ocean. That would be the dream.
I agree. I'm with you there. That would be so peaceful. It would be so
Mhm.
nice. Maybe one day I would just
Okay.
keep persisting, keep moving forward,
To
keep
keep
doing this
connecting.
thing. So, Debbie, can you tell me a little bit about community in terms of your creative endeavors? we are in a writing group together.
Mhm,
Have you found, because obviously you have community when it comes to your mental health. You're talking, you're reading this book,
mhm.
you're talking with a friend through that book, working through the concepts, right? But what about community in terms of your creative endeavors? Do you feel like you have that? Do you feel like it's helpful? Do you use it? Do you seek it out? All that
Mhm.
different stuff.
Obviously, I have the writing group that you and I are in, and I do find it helpful, and I have not participated as much because of the depression, but when I do, I get it's very helpful, and I have been more so lately, and I love it, and I love meeting everybody, and I love everything about it, and it's not yes, it is bouncing ideas off each other and venting frustrations and sharing in wins, but also it's connecting with other
Mhm,
people with shared life experiences. That's why I texted you. You got all the depression texts because you
mhm,
said, "Hey, I've gone through this." So I get a lot from that. I would like something local. I would like to see people in person. That I
mhm.
have found I do virtual therapy, and so I don't see people in person except my children, really. When I'm
The
trying
same.
to connect with these other people, but most of them are phone calls and texts. So I would love to meet in person and just be able to talk about creativity. I also think it would be really cool to have a specialized group like you're doing with this podcast.
Mhm,
Creative people, specifically writers, I think, but neurodivergent writers or writers with mental illness or whatever. And so people who can understand each other and like me and my friend with the text, okay, we know how to respond to each other so that we can ease each other's minds and still ask the creative questions, but not have to answer to not saying we have this happens in our group, but just saying in specific, like in general, not having to answer to or feel like we have to answer, why do I think like that? Why did I
mhm.
just put 17 messages in a row? Or that's an exaggeration, but but you
That's
know,
me.
sometimes so my thing is I'm either like, okay, do I put this in three separate messages or one really long message? Because either way they're gonna hate me. Like,
Yeah, it's a real,
so,
real
you know,
panic moment.
yeah, a group of like neurodivergent writers would be amazing for something like that. But so I think that would be great. But I would really like to work on an in-person group. And we have one in my small town, but it met at a time when I couldn't meet because of my last job. So I'm not sure when it is now. So I might check that out. Actually, now that I think about it, I forgot about it till just now. So
I hope you do. I hope you do. Where I live, there is a writers group locally. They meet on Wednesdays, and I haven't gotten the courage to go yet.
that's the
Not
other
gonna lie.
thing. Yeah.
I've known about it for like 6 months, and like every other week it like comes into my mind. I'm like, I should go.
Yeah.
But
I,
but I'm
yeah.
so scared. I'm
Yeah.
so scared.
Similar, but not creatively related. When I went to my first 12-step meeting, I drove there and I sat in the parking lot and I watched everyone go in for 3.5 months.
Wow.
And I couldn't go in because I was scared. And it's all fear-based. All the text messages, the multiple posts, everything, all the examples we given are fear-based. And you know what? That was in 2011 and it's 2024 now. And I'm not saying I've been consistent with that this whole time because I haven't had that connection. But when I have, my life has been a lot better. And
Mhm.
so, just as an example, like sometimes we can be scared, but we can do it anyhow, and it's going to reap great rewards. But that's really hard when you are neurodivergent or you have anxiety or you have something else that tells you that that's not true. It is, if you know that it could be good for you, and I know that it could be, then I think then it's worth working through the fear. And there's a phrase that I love to say. I don't know if I've said it to you, but prioritize is a verb. I should get that
Oh, you
tattooed.
haven't said that to me. Can you explain it
Prioritize
to
is a
me?
verb. Yes.
So it's like a
I
thing
saw
you
it.
do. Is that what you're saying?
Say that again.
It's a thing that you do? Is that
Yes,
what
it's a
you're
thing.
saying?
Yes. I think when I explain it like this. A lot of people make New Year's resolutions, right? Resolution is a
Yeah.
concept. You don't do a resolution. It just is. You know, you can do the steps towards a resolution, but a resolution itself is just a concept. It's a noun.
It's a construct.
Yes, yeah. So then some people will go, "Oh, I don't do resolutions. I make intentions." Well, there's a little more like action towards it, but not really. Not
Action. That's what it
yeah.
is.
It's
The
yes.
action.
And so prioritize. is a verb. And I saw this in a tweet a few years ago, and it said, instead of making resolutions or even intentions, ask yourself, what do you want to prioritize this year? And it changed my life. Obviously, it's not all rainbows and sunshine, like I said, but so then I came up with prioritize is a verb. And I tell all my clients when we talk about tasks and goals and stuff. So what we prioritize is what happens. If
Mm,
I say I'm going to prioritize writing, whether it's a sentence or 1,000 words or whatever, and that means I'm going to put it above other stuff. So
yeah,
writing above Netflix or whatever for that day. And if I don't prioritize it, intentionally prioritize it, it's not going to happen. It's just going to go on the list in our head and it's not going to happen. Or it might happen, but so if I say I'm going to prioritize getting to that writers group, but not just you, I'm not just talking to you, to me also. If I'm
yeah,
going to prioritize getting to that writers group, that means I'm going to put intentional action into doing it, no matter how scared I am about it.
yeah. The fear can be a showstopper.
Yes.
The
Yeah. And I'm
fear can
not
be a
downplaying that
showstopper.
at all. That's just a phrase that really helps me in a lot of areas, is to really think about it that way.
I know. I think it's a beautiful phrase, and I've been sitting here thinking how I've applied that
Mhm.
without knowing the phrase, how I've applied that in my own life. I started prioritizing movement as a part
Mhm.
of my depression, get out of depression and want to
Mhm.
unsubscribe from this life plan,
I love that. Yeah.
Um,
I'm
so
getting back to that. Yeah.
and movement was one of the things that I prioritized, and I gave up other things
Yes.
to prioritize that,
Yep.
and it has made such a difference in my life. Like, I'm not hardcore exercising or anything.
Yeah.
I go for a 30-minute walk in the morning. I go for a 30-minute walk in the afternoon
Yeah.
when the sun's baking me at 100 degrees, and I hate it. It's awful. It makes me grumpy to walk out the door because it's so hot and I hate being sticky. Like, being
I
sweaty
walk
is
out
a
and go,
thing that
ugh.
the being sweaty is a thing that overstimulates me. Like, I get
Yes.
overstimulated when I'm sweaty, and I go and do it anyways. And when I get home, I feel so much better. And I'm
Yep.
sticky and I'm sweaty and I hate it. And I rip off all my clothes and I put on fresh clothes and I crank down the air conditioning, all of that stuff. But that priority has made a huge difference in my
Yeah.
life. So I can,
Yeah. And I love it. And you said a key thing there. You said, I gave up other things to do that, because we only have so many hours and minutes in the day and
in
only
the
so
day.
much energy. And so if you just threw movement in with whatever else it was, how often was it going to happen?
Mm-hmm.
Because when we can't prioritize everything, and we try, but we can't do it. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's just like multitasking. It's a myth. We can't
It
prioritize
doesn't
everything.
exist.
It doesn't exist. And I remember in a graduate class, the professor was like, okay, who here considers themselves a good multitasker? And everybody raised their hands. And she was like, you're all wrong.
I love
Yeah.
that. I love that because it's so true. I can't
Yeah.
multitask, and I know that about myself.
Yeah. As far as what we consider multitasking, I am really good at it generally. But if I'm having a day, like it's not going to happen. But yeah, we cannot cognitively give 100% to everything. And it
Mm,
mathematically doesn't work. So it's the same thing with our priorities. We have to
yeah,
give up something in order to do something else. And hopefully that something is, like I said, Netflix, or doom scrolling is a big thing for me lately. When I've
don't get me
been
started.
I have been lately, like, I'll start scrolling, and after a few minutes, I go, you know what? I'm going to read, I'm going to write, I'm going to clean the kitchen, whatever. And I've been doing a
Switching.
lot better at it. And I feel really good knowing that I'm not just spending 3 hours laying in bed when I should be sleeping. Like, I'm not even reading Facebook anymore. I'm just scrolling. Like, why do we do that? To
Yeah,
escape, like you said.
yeah, yeah. To
So,
escape. That's
yeah.
exactly what it
So,
is. And sometimes you just feel so flat, like you said.
yep.
Sometimes you feel so flat, and everything feels so empty. And so
Empty and
even the
flat.
things that normally bring you joy are not
Mhm.
bringing you joy. And so you get stuck in this existential no man's land that's like
Uh-huh.
this black void of just, it's really, it's not fun. It's not fun.
Yeah.
It happens to me like once or twice a week because it's like between work
Yeah.
and all my creative endeavors and keeping up with my movement. There's 1 or 2 nights a week. It doesn't happen every night, but generally about once a week. I track it in my, I track my mood on a daily basis, and I can
Mhm.
see the days that it happens, but it normally happens like 1 day a week is minimum. And then typically two, but no more than that. But like at the end of a day after work, after really prioritizing all this other stuff, I just slip into like this, and my brain's dead. Can't
Mhm.
find enjoyment out of anything else. Um,
That was me
and
yesterday when I said it was funky. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I get that
And
feeling.
so when you're prioritizing the movement and all the stuff, are you prioritizing rest?
So that's one of the conundrums of people who, are anxious or ADHD. It's very, very common for people who have ADHD
Yep.
or autism that we have problems with sleep. It's also really
Mhm.
common for people with autism to have belly problems, like
Yep.
belly issues, gastro, which I have too.
I don't mean just
So,
sleep though, just rest, just peace and like
yeah.
peaceful resting time.
Yeah, that is like the one thing I can give myself is
Okay.
rest, not doing anything like unplugging, like just
Okay.
binge
That you're
watching a
unplugging it.
TV show or playing some video games, like not doing anything productive. That's rest to me. If I'm
Okay.
not producing something, I'm resting because when I get in bed, I could lay there for 2 hours before I fall asleep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Most nights. I would say every night. Most at this point, it's been like this since I was in my teenage years. It's just
Yeah.
part of life at this point. But yeah, and I've learned to prioritize rest because in my 20s, when I was begging for help from psychologists and my husband and all the people around me was begging for help and no one knew what was wrong with me, I had multiple breakdowns because I wasn't prioritizing rest,
Yep.
because I was running at the speed of a normal person with an unnormal brain. So I have learned to do it. But I remember when I first got married, we went on our honeymoon, me and my husband, ex-husband, excuse me. He was like, "I don't like you on vacation."
Oh, yeah.
I was
Nobody's
like,
good on
"What?"
vacation.
And I was like, "Why?" And he was like, "You don't chill the fuck out." He's like, "You just go, go, go." And I don't know how to sit still.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as something I've had to learn now that I'm in my 30s, I have no problem sitting still,
Yeah.
but it is something I had to teach myself.
Yeah. It is. And
Yeah.
that's why I asked. When I go on vacation, I need to rest. I need to lay on a beach somewhere. I'm fine doing some hiking, like doing whatever, but I need to rest because that's why I'm paying money to go on vacation. But people who are neurodivergent, who have anxiety, especially those, any other thing, but also especially those tend to have trouble resting because
Yeah.
our minds are constantly going. And so we sit down and then it's just that hamster wheel and then we feel guilty and it's all this stuff. And so I'm not trying to be a therapist here, but I couldn't help as soon as you said, I was like, that whole self-care thing, because I know personally, and I have so many clients who we don't rest or we don't prioritize, like I rest once a week or whatever. And then they wonder, like, why am I burnt out once or twice a week? Why do I have that blackness? Well, you're not resting, or you think you're resting, but you're really not. And so that's why I was wondering, because with that laundry
Yeah.
list of diagnoses, that is a big thing that
I
people
think,
tend to not do.
no, I appreciate you bringing it up. I think it's a valid point, and I think it's definitely a point that other people need to hear, that rest is important.
Mm.
I've kind of realized patterns for me in terms of like when I enter into that state of like no man's land of nothing is enjoyable, and I like not even looking at social media is enjoyable, like
Right.
nothing sounds good.
Yes.
I've realized that it's based on a couple of things. I've noticed a trend. If I don't sleep well the night before, it'll happen the next day.
Hmm.
If I am stuck in a loop, so my anxiety, my OCD is looping,
Hmm.
and it is a thing that just like it just won't give up, that will exhaust me.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I
It's
can't
draining.
rest myself from, like, I can rest, I can sit on the couch, but I can't stop my brain from doing the brain things.
Yeah, and
Like,
that's where things like yoga and mindfulness and whatever come into play, but of course not everybody loves those, but it's exactly right. Yeah.
yeah, no, that's why movement has been my
Yeah.
big thing. I've been really prioritized
Good.
movement. I went and got myself an Apple Watch and really dug into getting in my daily walks. And I have started going back to the gym, but the walks are the big part for me. I'm getting
Yeah,
in my
especially
walks only.
outside.
that sunshine, that
Yeah.
fresh air. It does a lady good. I want to touch on one thing because I've been trying to hold it and I'm afraid I'm going to lose it.
Okay.
And then we can start wrapping it up.
Okay.
But I know you've talked about 12 steps and
Mhm.
it reminded me of something. So there is this group and I haven't talked about it on the podcast. I'm not sponsoring them in any way. I've just utilized this resource before
Mhm.
and I found it to be a very valuable resource. And so I just want to put it out there for it. It is a group. They are a Facebook group, but they also have a website. They are a nonprofit, but their like hub of where they exist is on Facebook.
Mhm.
And it is called She Recovers. And it is a group specifically for women or people who identify as a woman. And it's a group for women and it is for women who are recovering and not just recovering from like drugs,
Mhm.
recovering from grief, recovering from eating disorders, recovering from divorce, like whatever you're recovering from, that's what it is for.
Mhm.
And they have like twice weekly, not twice weekly, twice daily Zoom meetings where you can go and meet with a bunch of women. It's kind of like an AA meeting in a way, but you don't have to like, it's not like, hey, I'm an addict or anything like that. You
Right.
can share or not share.
Support
You
meeting.
can,
Yeah.
there goes my dog. But it's a great resource. And because they are, and it's very holistic based. So they also have free yoga classes that you can join in on Zoom. They have trauma informed yoga therapists. They do a whole, like the people who run the group are trauma informed coaches. It's just a free resource. And so I just wanted to mention it on the
Nice.
podcast for you, but also for anyone else in a similar boat, because it's a place where I've gone when
Mhm.
I had needed support and maybe was feeling housebound in my depression where like I couldn't get out of the house.
Yeah.
That's been a really nice place for me to go for
Awesome.
support.
I think I've liked their page, liked it. I just, and because I see stuff sometimes, but I've never like really checked it out. So
Yeah,
that's
they are
cool.
a
I'm going to
great
look into it more.
resource. Yeah, I would definitely suggest it. We've gone like all over the place, I feel like. So
Do you
we
remember
can
what you were going to ask at first? Did you already
no,
ask it?
I don't. I'm like it's. Come on, you
Okay.
see, it's like in one ear, out the other.
It's
And
fine.
my brain skips all over the place. I don't remember crap. If I
I
don't
get it.
write it down, I'm not remembering it.
Yeah.
But I let's move into looking forward, right?
Okay.
So for you, what what is the goal right now? What is the goal for a year from now? Again, I know that putting constraints on things is not best for
Yeah.
us, so maybe not to look at it and
Yeah.
in that fashion, but what are we prioritizing for the
Yes.
next
I
month?
love it.
What are
Yeah.
we prioritizing for the next year,
Mhm.
both for yourself and creatively?
Yeah. Creatively, I'm prioritizing writing something or doing something related. And that could be like jotting a note down or talking to somebody about it, even whatever. Just, I don't want to necessarily say every day, but like most days. In the next year, I really want to get the sequel written and published. And I feel like, because it's like half done or third done. I don't know, it's partly done. And so I feel like that's realistic if I can keep a good momentum. I'm a solo parent and I work 2 jobs. So sometimes momentum is hard, but I think it's realistic. Personally, just I want to prioritize movement. I was getting back into the gym before this episode happened and I broke my foot. I was in the gym and then I broke my foot and then I got back in the gym and then I got depressed. So it's just been rough. So I wanted to prioritize movement and prioritize continuing to nurture those connections. And thinking about nurturing, there's something that I heard once. I stole it from an Instagram therapist. This is not mine, but she said, think about what nurtures you versus what depletes you. And like the way she said it was write out your schedule, everything you do. I wake up, I go to the
Mhm.
bathroom, I brush my teeth, like everything you do on a typical day, and then write an N or a D next to them. And you'll be surprised to see how many are D's.
Oh
And I've
yeah.
done that, but not super specifically. And so I really want to look at that and like the doom scrolling. That's really depleting. So I'm trying not to. Just stuff like that.
Is it like bad that sometimes like my writing is depleting? Like this whole thing of being in the query trenches is depleting. Like writing itself is great, but
Right,
like
right.
being in the query trenches is depleting.
Yeah.
Going through beta feedback is super depleting. I've talked about this
Oh,
in the
yeah.
group. Like I'm struggling with it.
But you need to make sure the nourishing is more than the depleting. So you're coming
Yeah.
out positive. And
Mm,
sometimes some things are more depleting than others. If querying is like 5 depletings, but doing the dishes is 1 depleting, do the math or whatever. But kind
I'm
of like
with
a
you.
spoon theory kind of thing. I've used that with some clients and some friends and some myself, and it's really helped. I just want to dive into it more and prioritize the nourishing things. So the connection, the movement, the creativity. Another one of my things for this year was simplicity. I've been given to Goodwill like crazy. I've been organizing stuff differently so my rooms don't look as cluttered, just stuff like that, because it helps soothe me when I walk in and there's not like
Mhm.
shit everywhere. So I just want to prioritize nourishment
Good.
and just like not only physically with the movement and like feeding my body stuff that's not in a microwave, just nourishment in general. You know what? Fed is best. Okay. I am
That
not
is
harping
best.
on anybody who struggles to eat regularly or whatever. You know what? You do what you got to do. But I would like more vegetables. My body wants something a little bit different. And so I want to give it that. We just got to
No,
listen to our bodies and do what we can with what we have.
I love all of these. I love all of these priorities that you have. I think they are good reminders for many of us who are on a similar journey, dealing with similar things, filling ourselves with nourishment. I think it's really important on it in this journey. Once you have mental illness, it's not going anywhere. It might go in remission, but
Yes.
it's not like it's
Doesn't
ever going to be
disappear.
completely exactly. And so
Right.
it's like we have to really focus on
Mhm.
nourishing both physically, mentally, emotionally. That nourishment is so important in this process and keeping ourselves healthy and able to keep creating and doing
Yeah.
that thing that we love to do so much.
Yeah. If you think about it, cancer, I had a boss who had breast cancer and she has to take medication for the rest of her life to help keep it in remission.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing. Like my depression is never going to be cured. That's not hope. That's not hopelessness talking. That's just being realistic.
Holistic,
But if
yes.
I do the things, whether all the things that I said, if I do the things and those will change and I adapt to what I need, I can keep it in remission. Or at least if it slips out of remission, it's a stage 1 instead of a stage 4,
Yeah,
and then I can reel it back in easier.
I agree. That's wonderful. That's beautiful advice. Keeping it in check, working with it, working alongside it,
Yeah.
pushing against it. I think that's an important reminder for all of
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
Um,
Working alongside it, not despite it. Like I didn't
ooh,
mean to rhyme, but that just,
with all these sayings
I
tonight,
know. So
just
proud of
full of
myself.
wisdom. Debbie, I really appreciate your time today. I've really
Yeah.
loved this conversation. I would say for me, it's been on the nourishing side, getting to talk to someone about these things and just finding that common ground, getting that connection. So thank you for giving that to
Yeah.
me. I do appreciate it.
And my
But
anxiety went away a few minutes in. So
good. Good. I'm glad. I tried to just be myself because if
yeah.
because I'm a weird quirky person, so I feel like if I'm being weird and quirky, like people are like, oh, she's doing it, I'm okay.
Yeah, exactly. And I love the word quirky instead of weird. You use whatever you want, but I love the word quirky, period. But when people say weird, I had that conversation with somebody today. I'm weird. And I was like, no, you're quirky. It just has a different connotation to it.
Yeah, I feel like weird can be a little negative
Yeah.
sometimes, but
Words
yeah,
matter. The
they do.
words we use matter.
They have meaning. They have meaning.
Yes.
But again, thank you. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing. Thank you for filling me up a little bit, putting this in the nourishing category and all of that. But
Yeah. Thank
where
you.
you're welcome. You're welcome. Where can everyone find you? Where are you
Um,
on the interwebs?
On the interwebs. Oh my goodness. All of my stuff is Debbie Lynn Writes. That's DebbieLynnWrites.com. And then on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook, it's all at Debbie Lynn Writes. I
You
do
got
not
lucky.
do X
It
or
all being the
Twitter or
same.
whatever.
Yeah, the only reason I got on X is because that CP in our group is on X, and she's always talking about the agents being on
Yeah.
X. And so I caved and I got on there, but I'm not really
Yeah.
using it.
It's
But you're
it, it's too
lucky.
much. I haven't done threads yet, but because I can't even keep up with all that stuff as like I don't post very often, but that's where you can find me, and I do if there's anything, like, I'm gonna be in Columbus, Ohio for an author fair, a book fair this weekend,
Fun.
and so that's where that kinda stuff is
Okay.
on those places.
I'm glad you're going and doing this thing. That's another thing that's like a connection. It's a big
Yeah.
deal.
Yeah, I keep
Um,
trying to back out of it, people tell me I have to go.
no, you have to go. You have to go. I'm with these people. I don't even know them, but you have to go. I agree. Concur. So I'm glad. Thank you, Debbie, again for the
Yeah,
time.
thank you so
It's been a
much.
wonderful episode. Wonderful episode. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Go find Debbie. She is such a joy to talk to, so easy to talk to. Go find her book and keep supporting. See you next time. Bye.